The theme of this year's Year in Review slideshow is Adaptation and Resilience. This photo of last September's event, Science in the Park, captures the spirit of what I mean. We were still able to hold this family-oriented environmental education event in Mill Park, albeit masked up and socially distanced. Thank you, Clackamas Water Environment Services, who was the event's primary funder. These two photos, taken in Gresham at our 2020 and 2021 Watershed-wide event, which is our largest volunteer event of the year in March, was still held this year. We had foot-operated hand-washing stations and smaller groups of volunteers. These were adaptations we used to provide COVID-safe events. Throughout the pandemic, we were generally restricted to groups of 10 volunteers when working on public land. So we often separated larger groups into groups of 10 or less and worked apart. The numbers of volunteers we had last year were substantially below previous years because of the restrictions, but the work continued. When doing trash cleanups in Johnson Creek in August, as many of you know, it's very difficult to socially distance. So we conducted a land-based cleanup, including several stretches of the Springwater Trail. Holding volunteer events has been difficult, but Courtney and Tiffany did a great job of keeping these programs going. Our volunteer program is funded by the Minkowski Fund of the Oregon Community Foundation, Portland General Electric Foundation, Clackamas Water Environment Services, the cities of Gresham and Portland, by the Otson Foundation, and by our individual donors. With public schools prohibiting field trips, working with youth through our service learning program proved challenging. Even so, Catherine, our Confluence AmeriCorps members, still managed to figure out a way how to work in a few field trips with private schools and do some online learning. A great job, Catherine. Our work with schools is funded by the Herbert A. Templeton Foundation and Gray Family Foundation. Thank you. We also hosted several internships with youth, especially internships with a bilingual Spanish language focus. And we were still able to do our work with youth at Leach Botanical Garden in the project Dr. Coles spoke about earlier, working with community groups, the Blueprint Foundation, and the African Youth and Community Organization through their youth. This particular photo shows a youth mentor from the African Youth and Community Organization during a pollinator learning activity. With these two groups, Wisdom of the Elders and Friends of Leach Garden, were all just completing year 2 of a 5-year restoration, education, workforce development project. As Dr. Coles mentioned, this project is really a good example, an aspiration of the watershed councils to do restoration in a way that includes segments of the watershed's diverse population that have not been included in our restoration work. One way we hope to accomplish this goal is to find a nexus that combines the needs of underrepresented groups with restoration. And this community project was begun and developed by all partners. And this is a model that we believe most values the contributions of all the partners. This community project has been funded by multiple sources. Grants have been awarded to the council by the Oregon Community Foundation and the Collins Foundation. And thank you to a major donor who wishes to remain anonymous for supporting our efforts on this project. Since January, we've been working with the management at Stonebridge Apartments near Southeast 92nd and Flavelle. This housing serves low-income senior citizens, several of whom have mobility challenges. Many ground floor apartments flood. Water on the roads makes it difficult for residents to spot holes on uneven areas of the walkways. In this photo, an AmeriCorps crew planted one of many trees in 5-gallon containers donated by Portland Parks and Recreation's Urban Forestry Department. The bigger project, which we hope to break ground on in September and October, is a combination of deep paving and rain garden and swale construction, which we hope will lessen flooding and keep water out of a private storm system that drains directly to Johnson Creek. We are partnering with a nonprofit DPAVE on depaving parts of this project, and I'd like to give a special thank you to Portland BES engineers Danny Kapsch and SK Amaro, who developed the technical design for this project. We plan to contract with businesses led by underrepresented groups in this project, which is something we've been working toward for the past 2 years. And this is really a team effort. Chuck is managing construction, Noah the planting, and Courtney planning of volunteers to help with this project. Way to go, Team JCWC. For many years, we've averaged 20 to 25,000 plantings of native shrubs and trees per year. On this map, you'll see approximately 80 points throughout the watershed of plantings that we've done with crews since our 10-year action plan began in 2015. This is a lot of mostly riparian plantings, and you don't even see the volunteer planting sites represented here, most of which are on Portland Parks and Recreation site, of which there are many. And on that note, thank you to Susan Hawes at Portland Parks for your work for more than 11 years partnering with JCWC on volunteer events. You'll notice several clumpings of sites here, starting with the lower watershed. You can see my cursor here on land at the interface of City of Milwaukee and Clackamas Water Environment Services territory. And they are both funders of our planting program. Thank you. We also have a concentration of sites in the Gresham area, which are funded by East Multnomah SWCD and some by the City of Gresham. So thank you. Our biggest grouping is in the upper watershed in rural Clackamas County. And this has been funded by the Clackamas Water Conservation District and small grants from the Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board. Thank you. One of the dots on this map, let's see if I can find, I think it's this one right here, is a homeowners association at Clattson, Butte. For the past 2 years, we've been working with this homeowners association to remove invasive species and plant natives on the property. Yesterday at our staff meeting, Noah told us that a second abutting HOA is interested in having council work on their land as well, which we're excited about because all of this land abuts City of Portland owned tax lots. So the health of a really large group of land is being improved together. And thank you to the Bureau of Environmental Services for funding this work. But most of all, Noah, thank you. This is a huge accomplishment here that you've managed in just 6 planting seasons. It doesn't show everything that you've been involved with for all those earlier years. So we're grateful to our volunteers for their tree planting efforts. Some volunteers, however, want a more scientifically based experience. And for them, we have community science. Volunteers collect important scientific data with specific protocols that help us and our partners in designing restoration projects and managing land. As an example of this, because of bird population data our volunteers collected at Powell Butte with a nonprofit Conservation Insight, the Portland Water Bureau has delayed construction repair of a reservoir at the Butte by several weeks until the prairie nesting birds that we all counted have fledged from their nests. Other community science projects we conduct include salmon surveys, beaver surveys, dragonfly surveys at 3 wetlands, and an annual eco-blitz. Thank you, Tiffany, for managing this community science program. Fish passage is a key issue the council and our agency partners identified in our 2015 action plan. Since 2016, we have removed, replaced, or retrofitted 7 barriers, mostly culverts, and also this dam pictured here. We have 3 more small fish passage projects we hope to implement this summer. The dam on the left was 5.5 feet high and blocked fish passage in Kelly and Mitchell Creeks in unincorporated Multnomah County. We removed this dam last summer. On the right, you'll see the same stretch of the creek post-project. The substrate here, you'll notice that you'll see is important, and it was placed to recreate a natural stream system. Because after the water behind the dam was released, we had several feet of mud. And the farmer was actually quite happy to have us spread that mud in his pasture. So kudos to Waterways for the engineering design and to Trask Design and Construction for the implementation. And a big thank you to East Multnomah SWCD, Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board, Paul Allen Foundation, and American Rivers for the funding. And good job, Chuck, on managing this complex project. Opening habitat to fish is important, but the quality of habitat makes a difference. The first mile of Johnson Creek can resemble a long, straight bowling alley at high flow, with water rushing through at high speeds and all the potential spawning gravel settling out only when it reaches the Willamette River. Approximately half a mile from the Willamette on Johnson Creek is the Highway 224 Cloverleaf. In Milwaukee, you'll see the part of it at the very upper part of this photo. And we want to thank the Oregon Department of Transportation for working with us on this project, and to Foresight Drone Services for this and other aerial photos. So here's the same project. And in these two photos, I'd like to draw your attention to the gravel bar beneath the yellow arrows. It's the same gravel bar, just the photos are from different angles. The gravel bar formed over this past winter just downstream of one of the root wad log jams we installed last summer to create fish habitat. The log structures help to slow down the high stream velocity, provide cover for juvenile salmon, and trap gravel where adult salmon can spawn. So this is exactly the type of thing that we hoped would happen, and it happened very quickly. One of the structures that you saw in the earlier photograph was located at a super cold tributary entering Johnson Creek through a culvert. In the summer, temperature can reach salmon lethal levels in the Willamette River, so Johnson Creek is a cold water refuge, not only for salmon who spawn on Johnson Creek, but also for those on their way to the Sandy M. McKenzie and other upper Willamette tributaries. This project, we hope, will serve as habitat for all these fish. A common objective of both this project and the Kelly Creek Dam Removal Project are providing access to habitat in cool areas, part of our cold water restoration strategy to mitigate the impacts of climate change. So thank you to Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board for funding, and to Oregon Department of Environmental Quality for helping us to secure mitigation funding to complete this project. And big kudos to Wolf Water Resources for the engineering design, and to Biohabitats for the construction. And another great example of project management, Chuck. Pandemic really forced us to rethink many things, including how we communicate with a variety of our constituencies. The picture here is a screenshot from last October's 6th annual Science Symposium, which, like this annual celebration, is usually held at Reed College, but was instead held via Zoom webinar. We relied on Zoom webinars for many of our educational efforts this year, and thank you to Tiffany for creating our new community engagement series of educational webinars on topics ranging from pollinators to working with beaver. These webinars allowed us to reach close to 2,000 people, some even from the East Coast, because, well, distance is no longer a barrier. We also put more effort into our social media presence during the pandemic, focusing on Facebook and Instagram, and on creating more YouTube videos. In particular, our Instagram presence grew substantially, which has allowed us to increase our exposure to a younger demographic. And since George Floyd's tragic death, we have increased our emphasis via social media on intersectional environmentalism. So thank you to Catherine and Tiffany for building and transforming our social media. Our work in transforming our own organization to be inclusive has been funded in the past 3 years by the Meyer Memorial Trust. And thank you, Meyer Memorial Trust, for investing in the council. One thing that gets lost when we look back just on the last year is that restoration at a site doesn't just happen over the course of a single year. I'd like to close this year in review talk by showing the changes over several years at our largest restoration project in the past few years. This fish passage, wetland restoration, and temperature reduction project was constructed in 2019 on Mitchell Creek at property owned by the Centennial School District. Metro, East Multnomah SWCD, OWEB, Department of Environmental Quality, and the Nature Conservancy and Portland General Electric funded this project. We had a great engineering design from OTAC and construction work from Biohabitats. And I'd like to give a big thank you to Kathy here, because there were a lot of grants on this project. It was complex tracking them all and figuring out the matching funds and multiple vendors and grant deadlines. And she did it without any issues. And I do want to mention that once again, our auditor told us that Kathy is the most competent nonprofit financial manager she's worked with. And in the 6 years that I've worked on the audit, we've had a clean audit every time. So thank you, Kathy. In this first picture, we see a shallow pond created by damming up Mitchell Creek with 2 culverts at the inlet and the outlet. Over decades, fine sediment has left this 0.7 acre pond only 10 inches deep. On a particular hot day in 2016, we measured a change of 14 degrees Celsius across this pond. This photo was taken a month later in July. It was taken at the same vantage point in June 2019 during construction. The lower culvert has come out, draining the pond, and note the large wood going in to provide new fish habitat. There's still a remnant of a pond here, very visible. This next photo was taken a month later in July after construction ended. Notice the additional wood structures. The upper culvert is gone. And here, this is where the upper culvert was, and how the vegetation is beginning to grow inward from the margins. This next photo was taken 10 months later in April of 2020. Notice how much the vegetation has grown in a short time. Volunteers during watershed-wide events in 2 years, and crews from the wisdom of the elders have planted 10,000 trees, shrubs, and willow stakes here over several years. A native seed mix donated by U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service helped to initially repopulate the bare soil here, so we don't think that much sediment really washed downstream. Of scientific interest, last summer, a group of Confluence AmeriCorps members gathered to do a mortality survey of many plants here. This has allowed us to see which species have done well and which haven't. As climate change intensifies, it's important to know which species will be most appropriate in our watershed at different restoration locations and positions on the landscape. On the right, you'll notice a small offline pond by my cursor here. This was an intentional part of the design to retain habitat for amphibians and dragonflies. And this spring, our board member, Katie Holzer, who is also a watershed scientist with the City of Gresham, organized an egg mass survey and documented several amphibian species, including the sensitive red-legged frog. And here's the final slide for tonight. And this was taken earlier this month. Note how the vegetation has filled in even more. The willows are getting tall, and a sizable cattail stand has developed here in the background. See my cursor. Cattail is great habitat for marsh wrens, birds we never saw here before the project. And we've been doing bird habitats here, surveys for 8 times a year since 2017. And we're also starting to see willows flycatchers. We saw them the first time last summer. After seeing the remnants of standing water in the upper pond back, approximately here last summer, I really stressed that we would not realize the full temperature reduction objectives that we had hoped for this project. But when I looked again early this spring, I saw the cattails and the wapato had been trapping sediment, in effect, building new land so that the ponded area had narrowed, and a defined stream channel is slowly forming. In the area further downstream in the pond, approximately here with my cursor, the vegetation is completely closed, and the stream channel has changed its shape from a wide and narrow channel to one that is about 1.5 feet wide and 2.5 feet deep. And this is an ideal channel form with fully formed vegetation, which all serve to lower the temperature. So really there's no need to worry. When we remove human constraints from a natural system, nature heals. Just not necessarily in the way we imagine and not according to our schedule.